Hi Nick, we're back again. It's good to see you.
Good to
Um,
see you.
and I think I've always been of the view that these conversations, rather than just talking about reporting on events, we should learn something from.
Mm.
And certainly, my main focus is to get under the skin and try and resolve some of these issues. And I'm actually quite active in doing that. And actually, some quite senior political levels in the UK to genuinely play a part in that solution. And I tend to focus on the psychology. And so, one of the elements that I wanted to friendly challenge you on is, and we have to challenge our own dialogue.
Yeah, of course we do.
Is this notion of cowardly men, which
Mm.
I totally understand, but in the winning thinking parlance, it's a broad term, and I think it's potentially disrespectful to people in certain environments and unfair. So I wanted to really understand what you meant by that, and also I've got it's a bit of a specialist subject of mine, so I wanted to share my thoughts with the analysis, and then you know, if in the usual way, if you kick it off, I'll share my thoughts, and let's compare notes and provoke each other, and then talk about what we can do to fix this later. So, over
Sure.
to you, my friend. Talk to me about what you mean by cowardly men, and actually trying to explain some of the elements that may make that up, so to speak.
So 4 years ago, I wrote my first book called Lessons in Courage.
Okay.
And that was where I explored cowardice. So I wanted to look at why we're in such a mess that we're in the UK.
Yeah.
So I explored things like, the woke agenda, feminism, um, the fact I'd been cancelled and how nobody stood up for me, 4 or 5 years ago when that happened.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and the book sort of came to the conclusion that we're in this mess because men didn't do what men should have done decades ago and
Yeah.
all the way up to today.
Yeah.
So I use the word cowardice quite a lot.
Yeah.
It's a general term. I don't mean that every man in this country is a coward, and I don't mean that every man in this country is at the same level that other men are. So I use it a little, and I get pushback for this all the time. For people who follow me, people who like me, a lot of people don't like me using this word,
Yeah.
and I use it for several reasons. The first reason is for shock value, because I
Yeah.
want to grab someone's attention.
Yeah.
I don't want to be having a 2 hour conversation on postmodern Marxism. I don't want to be
Yeah.
having a 3 hour
No.
conversation on the Frankfurt School and how it got over to American universities and how it linked in with feminism and how it looks at oppressor. The vast majority of people turn off and go, I have no idea what's going on there, Nick. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to come up with a shorter, quicker way of getting to the issue so
Yeah.
people can understand.
Yeah.
One of the main benefits, I think, of why I use the word cowardice is because it slaps you in the face.
Yeah.
And not everybody, but a lot of people, I hope, go away going, I need to think about what he just said.
Yeah.
Am I a coward? Are we cowards? And maybe the answer is no, I'm not a coward. And that's great if you don't think you're a coward. But I
Yeah.
want people to think about what are they doing to protect themselves, their
Yeah.
family, their community, their nation. And
Yeah.
if the answer is I'm doing nothing,
Yeah.
then I would probably put you into the sector that I call cowardly.
Mm.
And I think the final point of why I use it is because I've always tried to promote personal responsibility.
Yeah.
And I tend to use the word cowardice when people are giving me excuses and reasons why they do nothing, such
Yes.
as
Yeah.
such as there's no point, Nick. This country's over. Well,
Yeah.
you sound like a coward to me, mate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
or Nick, I'm not bothered anymore now. I'm going to move to Poland. I'm going to move to Lithuania. I'm going to move to America.
Yeah.
Those three places, I've had friends tell me those things. And I've said to them, oh, you sound like a coward. You've spent
Yeah.
years criticizing foreign immigrants from coming to this country to pursue a better life. You've
Yeah.
criticized them, and I call them cowards for abandoning their homeland. And now you're going to do exactly what they do. You're going to be a foreign coward now, going somewhere else for a better life.
Yeah.
I want people to stop looking at politicians, immigrants, and everybody else to point the finger to and say, you're to blame. because
Yeah.
I've come to the conclusion the reason why we're in this mess is because we're to blame. Men are protectors, so I blame English men, British men.
Yeah.
And we never should have allowed feminism to take hold. We never should have allowed
Yeah.
this woke agenda to take hold, this
Yeah.
neo-Marxist to take hold, to
Yeah.
have open borders. We shouldn't have allowed those things over decades and decades and decades. That's why I use the word cowardice.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. So really interesting what you say that. So just referring to some winning thinking parlance, because this is right in the winning thinking space. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, Using what you've done to provoke people, which is the antithesis of winning thinking. So the analysis of cowardice, it's a negative, or calling someone a coward, it's a negative generalization. So of course, neither Tom or Nick are always cowards, but sometimes we might be, right?
Yeah.
But it's a great way to provoke a discussion. It's a great way, as long as you've got the skills to be able to unravel it, because and I think uh, as well, this notion of giving up as well is very interesting. And I think what I'd like to touch on is what I think, for what it's worth, the elements, because I'm absolutely fine to wind people up, you know, uh, as long as there's a positive outcome and there's a solution, there's a way to get there. And I think the levels of manipulation and lying that have taken place over the last 40 years have made this challenge relatively unmanageable. And I'll just give you some idea of what I think about this. So, I mean, I think there are genuine cowards. So I've noticed in the sunshine, there are blokes, frankly, that are running on the roads they're running like women. I don't know if you noticed that.
Mm.
And also that, I know people who work in the public sector, teachers and stuff, who actually put on effeminate actions, almost like to mitigate, which I think is genuinely cowardly and sort of. There was an experiment done in the States a long time ago in a prison, and they dressed all the prisoners up in women's clothes. And
Mm.
guess what? They all behave like women. And so I think that I regard that as being completely cowardly. So I think that is one aspect. Although people don't, my main concern with all of this is people don't realize how easy that they don't understand their own psychology and how easy
Mm.
we are to be manipulated. So I think as well, the bigger context is you know, the real Marxists are experts at trying to control power in an incredibly vengeful, threatening way. And frankly, if you haven't got the skills to make sense of that and actually undo that and care enough, one of the interesting things that I think is really matters is what makes you care, Nick, right? And who actually bloody well cares. And a lot of my mates I go to the pub with, some of which I've fallen out with, frankly, during this journey. But the ones that have survived, sort of say, well, it doesn't really affect me. I just get on with it, which I just don't understand. So I think but I think there's an element there of not really having the big picture. And you and I are big picture thinkers,
Mm.
so not everybody's like that. And I think the other thing is that there's a big cost. So, um, from a Christian perspective, Christianity is largely about following Jesus and doing the right thing. Um, but if there's real cost to doing that, Nick, so you and
Mm.
I have accepted that cost for different or maybe similar reasons. We know the costs of doing the wrong thing,
Mm.
maybe from different perspectives. Um, and I think as well, people don't realize how vulnerable they are to manipulation. So if you bend people out of shape in one dimension, you can completely screw them up. And I noticed that in a company turnaround perspective, when things get tough, people start breaking the rules and paying the wrong people, paying themselves, and frankly breaking the law. So I think the other thing I'd discuss or like to raise is the sophistication of the attack that people are facing. So this whole this divisional intersectional thing, you talked about feminism, you talked about the multifaceted stuff around, well, we've talked about all the other divisional things, intersectionals, where you've got victim and perpetrator. You've got a claim of virtue and you step out against that and you get clobbered, and people need
Mm.
to know how to address that. Um, and I think you've then got the victim scapegoat terror. So when you talked about people leaving the country, they'll always talk about blame, right?
Mm.
So if you when blame victims, the symptom of victimhood is blame, um, and that's just disastrous. And people are very vulnerable to this stuff. I think as well, people are also addicted to social media, so their mind space, Nick, to do what they've got to do in the way that we'd like to see them is limited. And addiction, I think, in its simplest form, and you've probably got a different definition of this, is where somebody loses control, Nick. Okay. And normally you have to impose legislation on reducing control of technocratic control of social media, and there's no control over that. So if you think about how much time bandwidth you've got and how much manipulation comes your direction, fed, filtered, reinforcing your beliefs, my beliefs, not challenging us enough, that's not healthy either. So I think the other thing is indoctrination. So for some reason, you and I won't fall for bullshit, Nick.
Mm,
For me, it's partly because of my practical experience, but it's also my Christian faith and I believe that's where my strength comes from. So and I think I've noticed practically as well that people with a sort of rod of Christianity running through them don't get bent out of shape. So I think there's all the people who are coming to the fore, even like people like Colin McGregor and people like that, have turned to Christian faith and messed with Colin McGregor. And there's something that gives you that strength as well to avoid indoctrination. And people are very vulnerable to indoctrination because it is a comfort, Nick. It's a
mm,
comfort in indoctrination, even though it's totally baseless. I think the other thing as well is the unbelievable horror. So this thing about renting homes to migrants is just it's something this what this does psychologically is it presents people with such increasingly horrific things that they fail to believe them even though it's reality, and this is all intentional. Conflicting messages as well. Forgive me, I just want to really be exhaustive of this just to try and bloody unpack this damn thing because I think it's important to get to the crux of it, and please challenge me in a minute. I think conflicting messages, this whole trans thing and the men women thing, people think that's a victory. It's not. It's not a victory at all because this is just Starmer. But this is an ideal opportunity to create a conflicting message and to also claim virtue all over again. But he has no intention of seeing that through.
mm,
Um, I think as well, obviously, COVID was a massive opportunity to bend people out of shape. This force wearing masks, even at the most granular level, walking around with a mask on your face. What level of control is that? And again, once you've done that, you've been through that, you either think that was okay, or I mean, I regret. I mean, I took the vaccine. I can't believe I did it. Well, actually, when I took it, I might have mentioned this before, I knew it was wrong, but when I came out, my wife said, we need to go on holiday. And then I took it. Anyway, whatever. You know, we're all vulnerable to being bent out of shape. I think, you know, so I think this challenge is nasty. I think as well, practically, the steps that Starmer are taking actually making people quite dramatically poorer. And of course, people are that raises fear. Um, I think I just mentioned big picture thinkers. We need people like you and I in positions of leadership who can see the big picture, who care sufficiently, because a lot of people just don't see that, Nick.
mm,
We need to be aware of that. So you and I are talking about a challenge and courage, but people don't even see the challenge or know what to fix. Um, then, for some reason. So, and as well, it's interesting as well. No, Lawrence Fox came off social media because he felt like he'd given up, right? And I wouldn't regard him as, but so there's this element of with all of this crap going on that people are not getting the results, Nick. So if you're not getting the results from what you're doing or whatever you're doing, whatever actions you're taking, that's obviously going to create doubt in your mind as to whether or not it's the best use of your time, or do you carry on regardless? Um, and so, you've got this running in corporate perspective. You've got this awful situation with the Royal Marines. I don't know if you picked that up. This guy that's
mm,
flagged it up in the Royal Marines, and Royal Marines, bloody. And these are people where you now looking to develop the courage and grit, to do difficult things, and it's just been completely trashed, complete corruption. Um, and you then got these absolute maniacs, which is going on in the background, like the WHO, WF type stuff, and this complete lunatic Peter who's taken over the WEF, saying that
mm,
saying things like water is no longer a human right. And you've also got good people like Ben Habib and others, not specifically Ben, but a lot of good political figures saying we need to wait till 2029. Right, another phrase which normalizes something, which
mm,
I don't accept. I think we face significant threats. Like you say, that we need to address and action now. We can't wait till 2029. But that psychology traps people. I think the level of threat we're facing is far more sophisticated than 1930s Germany.
Mm.
So, and I think the other thing as well, free speech. What makes us human, Nick, is what we say. It's what we think. It's what's in your head. It's what's in my head. And if you stop someone from saying that, there are very sophisticated, well, very pragmatic psychologists that actually talk about that being the suicide of self, right? So, I mean, if you think about it, it's actually, if you're, a bit like Tommy Robinson locked in a prison cell without being able to speak or communicate, that is, just destroying someone. So, you've then got the EU Commission aspect to this damn thing, where you've got the Ursula, who's just the most indoctrinated buffoon puppet, just like Starmer, saying things like pre-debunking. So they're now trying to preempt what they regard prevent misinformation, which means effectively shutting down any free speech around topics
Mm.
whatsoever that don't fit the narrative. Um, and they use the analogy, the psychology of prevent it inoculating people, Nick. You know, around misinformation. It's just so utterly vile.
Propaganda. Well,
Yeah,
that's just a new word for propaganda.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they're also creating this corrupting dialogue, which provides this overall
Mm.
sphere, which is pretty difficult to address. So and I think for me, uh I've spent a lot of my time through company turnaround the last 15, 20 years, 200 company turnaround, studying this psychology. And what concerns me most is that people don't have the skills, let alone the knowledge or understand their own psychology
Mm.
to know how critical it is not to get bent out of shape and steer a course which, frankly, isn't going to destroy people. So I think, you out of all of this, if people, right, um, if people don't step out and do uncomfortable things, Nick, you never discover anything about yourself, right?
Mm.
So you are definitely someone in that category, and that's a journey of self-discovery, right? But if you don't have and this is an issue of having courage, or that requires courage, Nick. It
Mm.
requires courage for you and I every day to do those things, or even have these discussions now, to some degree. But in doing that, what you do is you discover yourself, Nick. You discover truth. And Jordan Peterson talks about this, that truth basically sorts out any crap, and anti-truth destroys everything. So, and that actually in doing that, you then develop the grit, and it's a journey of personal discovery, that enables you to have the grit to face the next challenge, right? And so
Mm.
you and I, if you think about it, we've done those things. And so, but I think the severity of this challenge is, I mean, just take COVID, right? Um, the Nuremberg Treaty. Do you know what the Nuremberg Treaty was put in place for, Nick? Do you know why it was?
Post Second World War Nazis.
Do you know what specifically it's for?
No.
No, it was specifically. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be an arse, but just um, but the Nuremberg Treaty was put in place to prevent people doing medical experiments on people,
No.
right? And actually, what's happened, right? And you think about those medical experiments that are done on, in the concentration camp, and they're
Yeah.
just unbelievably vile. We have that right level of horror with COVID.
Mm.
I'm not, and we have that level of horror as well with the climate bloody stuff, this
Mm.
stuff that's spraying in the skies. That has nothing to do with climate modification. That's to do with population reduction.
Mm.
It's also to do with, I say that because I've studied the shit out of it. It's my
Mm.
book. COVID. The only positive thing, or the only effect that people realised with the COVID mRNA vaccines was that it wrecked your hippocampus, which means that it makes you easy to indoctrinate. The Chinese discovered that in 2017. It didn't. It killed 20 million people. It was never intended to fix COVID, Nick, at all. And
Mm.
I mean, it has no. It's saved none, and that comes from the greatest scientist uh, who's studied this in detail, who has the courage to speak out. The guy called Peter McCulloch, who I've interviewed
Mm.
twice, uh, and that's corroborated. And I think the other difficult thing I'd just add to this is that you've got people like him, you've got people like less so him actually, because he's in the States, but you've got people like Andrew Bridgen, who's an exceptional man who has been completely cancelled.
Mm,
And yet he, in the normal course of events, if you were going to recruit someone, Nick, to sort out this crap, you'd put him front and centre.
mm,
So and yet he's got unravelled by this victim-centric stuff, these labeling, these lies, the scapegoating. He's been labelled as being anti-Semite, and packaged up in this bullshit bubble of anti-Semite and thrown in the bin.
mm.
And even Andrew doesn't know how to handle that, right? Ben Habib doesn't know how to handle that. Rupert doesn't know how to handle that. That's why I'm getting involved in playing an active part in this solution as best I can, at frankly a huge cost to myself. But
Mm.
I'm the sort of person that knows, and I knows what the cost to myself is if I don't do things, Nick. And you probably know that as well.
Mm.
You probably know if you started to pander to these lunatics, exactly what that would do to you. I'm sure. You'd become extremely distressed and upset
Yeah,
about.
yeah. And so
Over
you
to you, my friend.
you've said a lot there that we're not going to be able to get into the vast majority of that.
Yeah.
But bringing it back to cowardice,
Yeah.
and you spoke a lot then about courage. Courage and cowardice are not the same thing,
Okay.
and they're not the opposite of each other either.
Yeah.
So I define courage as someone who's seeking the truth. So
Yeah.
courage, we have, it's a human trait to be courageous to a certain extent. It was courageous men who went out to seek new lands, who invented new stuff, who put their lives on the line for society, for community, for their family.
Yeah.
That's courageous.
Yes.
I define cowardice as knowing consciously what you should do and
Yeah.
not doing it anyway because it's easier not to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's cowardice. So I don't expect people to be courageous.
Yeah.
I don't class myself as courageous. People keep saying to me, "Oh, you criticize people being cowards. Should we all be like you, Nick?" And I go, "No, don't be like me. Be better than me.
Yeah.
I'm nothing special. I'm
Yeah.
just pointing out where we're making mistakes, but don't aim to be me. Jesus,
Yeah.
I don't want to be me. I'd like to be better than what I am."
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I try to get onto the granular level of the cowardice part of it. Because if you was a normal person and you just listen to your what you just said then over 5-6 minutes, that's enough to make you go, what's the point? I
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
fight the WF. I can't fight the WHO.
Yeah.
Look what they did over COVID. How can you further? What's the point of me trying to do anything? Because look at the mountain. I can never beat that mountain.
Yeah.
What I try to do to people is say, right, forget the big picture.
Yeah.
Change happens one tiny, tiny step at a time.
Yeah.
And it might be a journey of a million steps, but we've got to be on that journey if we're going to get change. So
Yeah.
and people say, well, Nick, it's all right for you. I've got a mortgage, I've got 3 kids, I can't afford to get arrested and lose my job. I go, well, I completely agree with you. We
Yeah.
don't need martyrs. Being a martyr isn't being brave, because if you purposely turn yourself into a martyr, all you've done is you've achieved nothing, and you've scared everybody else a little bit more about what could happen to them. So in
Yeah.
fact, you're used as a tool by the enemy by scaring the populace. So don't be a martyr, but everyone can push back. And I've come up with a phrase 4 years ago in the book as don't be a whinger, be a ninja. Be a ninja, as
Yeah.
in fight back sneakily. Be a sneaky motherfucker.
Yeah.
You don't have to fight like me and you do open, on social media with our names out there and go on videos and we don't you don't have to do it openly. I'm at a stage now where I've been cancelled. I can
Yeah.
never work in the charity sector again. I can't work for local government ever.
Well, hopefully you might be, Nick, if we sort this out, actually, my friend.
I don't think ever in my lifetime I'll be able to work in those sectors
I
again.
challenge that. I challenge that.
But a discussion.
I understand why you're saying that. But
yeah. But that's what I've had to say to myself. Otherwise, I'd be wasting time now
yeah,
trying to
see
get
how
jobs
that's
in those
normalizing.
sectors.
See how you've normalized something that closed the door, haven't you?
Yeah, and we do that all the time
Yeah.
on lots of things. But so I say to people, lots of things you can do. So how about, this is really a Jordan Peterson thing, how about you don't tell any more lies? So
Yeah.
don't go along with men, that trans women are women. transmen, don't go along with it. Don't
Yeah.
fight it at work. Just say,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I don't believe in that. Well, when people tell you something in a pub and you know it's wrong, then call them out on it and just say, no, don't have a discussion with them. Don't debate him, because there's a
Yeah.
very good chance you won't beat him because you don't know enough. You don't know enough information. But just say, yeah, that's not true. And when they say to you, can you show me some stats? Can you explain it? No, thank you. And close it.
Yeah.
No, thank you. But you've done something brave. You said that's not true, and
Yeah.
close the conversation,
Yeah.
because you can't win the argument. So close the conversation. Other people around you will hear you say that, and they will go, that's what I believe, but I wasn't brave enough to say it, but they
Yeah.
said it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll say it next time. And it's on that granular level that I want people to stop being so cowardly. I don't
Yeah.
expect people to set up political parties, hold demonstrations. I want you to stop living a lie. I want you to be a slightly better man than you were yesterday. That's
Yeah.
how I want us to change.
Yeah. I love that, Nick. You made some really great points there. I think, yeah, I think one of the, I mean, I'm not saying at all you're wrong. I just say my interest is creating the framework to enable what you've just described to happen, right?
Mm,
Because one very practical problem is that you mentioned this earlier, actually, if people step out, people don't support each other, right?
mm,
So you're perceived, I'd support you, but we're a very bloody, in terms of the percentage of the population, Nick, how many people are there, um, you know, like that? But the the point I'd like to make is that I think one, even by my standards, right? I sort out really nasty problems, right? Company turnaround is nasty, it's a psychological nightmare. People are losing their houses, homes, well-being. No, finance directors in tears.
mm,
There's no financial
mm,
information. There's fraud going on. You name it. It's just, and it's pretty much the level of corruption that the UK faces, right? So this is familiar territory for me. So the way I fix this is to try and create a structure to get those people who are badly malfunctioningly cowards, you know,
mm,
or lacking courage, or in fact lacking ability to create the framework to put them back on the rails. So what do I do about that? I and I think this is why it's so difficult. I put the structure in place to give people opportunities to put their stuff back together. And there's typically I delegate that to what I describe as being right wing people who are entrepreneurial, who take responsibility for stuff, versus the left wing people who frankly are just normally told what to do,
mm,
who are in organizations more transactional, who less bigger picture people, but they need to be made accountable, right? Now, if those people are not made accountable, you've got politics which just destroys you, and that goes further and further left, unchecked, because you've got no accountability, right? So somebody somewhere needs to hold people effing well accountable,
mm,
right? And so, from a Christian perspective, you don't have any peace, right, without. This is another add to my bloody list, but I just add to my list one thing. You don't have any peace without justice, Nick.
mm,
So this two-tier justice thing is a very serious problem, because if people don't feel there's any justice, you'll never have peace, because you'll just embolden the perpetrators and really piss the people off like you and I that care. And that's very divisive. That's another thing. So you need to get these sort of things, hold people accountable, Nick, to the truth. And that needs to come down from the top, because if you've got leaders like Starmer who are absolute expert liars, because Marxism is all lies, and so
mm,
they are the most beautiful, expert, generalized, corrupting liars you could possibly imagine. Then, what I've actually done is I've actually looked at some of these challenges, Nick. Right, so you have to be really careful with this, right? So you've got people like Rupert Lay, you've got people like Ben Habib, you've got in particular people like Nick Tenconi, all of which I
mm,
absolutely adore, saying that we need to remove illegal migrants. Right?
mm.
I mean, do you believe we ought to remove illegal migrants? By the way,
Oh, and a lot further than that. Yeah.
yeah, totally. But just anyway, just bear with me, right? Now, if you just look at what's required to remove illegal migrants, right? And we say that, right?
Mm,
But actually, what's the reality? I think, there's one estimate, which frankly, there's no better estimates: 175,000 soldiers, Nick, to remove the illegal migrants, given the flare up that's likely to take place. So That's not no that and that our current budget is tens of 20 billion, I think, and that's 2.5 times our current armed forces. Most and those 75,000 soldiers we've currently got are not they're not available. They're sort of filling in DEI forms
Mm,
or something probably at the moment, so they're sort of bloody useless. So we may even need to bring in soldiers from the USA, I think, to sort this shit out. Right now, and there's a cost of about 40 billion pounds to do that, maybe.
mm,
Anyway, so that's no small challenge. You need to find a way to do that. I believe we need to do that sooner rather than later. We can't wait to 2029. I think we need to find a case to do that. I think. Anyway, so that's one of the challenges, Nick. Right. So actually, given the fact that the armed services are so effing well corrupted, and even the Royal Marines have taken on
mm,
this DEI stuff, so we need someone militarily who understands how to do that, who's willing to stick their neck on the line to do that. Anyway, so and actually, I'll just come back to you in a friendly way because this is exactly now you've just said something, and I mean this with love, Nick. I'm showing this
mm,
love for you, Nick, in terms of your best interests. Uh, and this is the dialogue we have to watch out for that Nick will never work in the charity sector. That's not true, Nick. That's a negative generalization. And if we get this right, you should be leading the bloody charity sectors, Nick,
mm,
again. And I'd like to, if we do all this stuff, then I'd like to say within I agree it's not going to happen overnight, but I'd
mm,
say within a reasonable time frame, people like you, people like Andrew Bridgen, people like Rupert Lowe, people like that list of people, Nick Tenconi, all with their own specific skills and experience to put this stuff back together, should be play a part in the team to fix this bloody situation. Because at the moment, Nick, if you take a really broken system, this is what happens in a company turnaround. I always look at who is thriving, Nick. Who thrives? Who's thriving in this bloody situation? It's the idiots, isn't it? And if you take
mm,
Starmerism, you've got these atrocious idiots. You've got the hideous rape gangs. All the wrong people are thriving and they're being emboldened. The migrants are being told how to report English people for, racism, so
mm,
to speak, whatever that is. And in fact, racism isn't even a defined term, let alone Islamophobia. So you've got this multi-level corruption, Islamophobia, which claims racism, and racism you can't even define racism.
mm,
So um, I'm not trying to uh, paint a negative picture, but I think I'm just trying to paint the level of courage, Nick. The
mm,
level that we talked about courage require and skills and expertise. And I'm not saying you've got bits of picture to play a part in this, and you're desperate to get involved. And the challenge is, how do we get in the driving seat, Nick, to actually get this influence to
mm,
make sure your route is actually to head up the charity sector
mm,
rather than write it off within your lifetime, and actually have that in your mind and acknowledge the fact that you know that's the dialogue, and that because that's the sort of dialogue, right, which is preventing people from actually fixing this stuff. And
mm.
potentially I don't call that cowardice, Nick. I'd call that being aware of your own psychology, and that's something that's come out of your mouth. And I challenge myself, by the way.
Yeah.
So I'd play this back to myself and I'd listen to what I'm saying, that's screwing my psychology up and my ability to courage to take action. Let's say what's stopping me, and there are things that do stop me from doing things, Nick.
I'm sure there is, because we're all human and we've all got different lives and different responsibilities and different things going on. So none of us can ever fight the same fight and do the same things because we're all individuals. But that's our strength as well, being
Yeah,
individuals,
yeah,
because we all can come up with different solutions, different ways of fighting, different ways of
absolutely.
pushing back. And most of them will be rubbish ways. But
Yeah,
every now and again, we get someone special who thinks differently and thinks outside the box, who changes the world and can solve problems. And we
yes,
don't know who those people are until
no,
they do it. So
yeah, totally.
that's why we need to celebrate our individualism to a certain extent, because
Yeah,
that's what's got us to where we are today, the most dominant creature ever on this planet.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
there's
Just on that point, can I just
yeah,
respond to that, Nick? Because that's a very important point. I think, from my experience, I use the analogy of a jazz band, Nick, right? Which
mm,
is a intimate group of people like you and I, right? No holds barred, say what the hell we like to each other. You know, we've got the skills to know not to take offense, right?
mm,
We've got the relationship to understand more about each other, so that just never happens. But And actually, I think the assumption that we start with truth, and I think truth is a discovery, Nick, and it's about you and I, and or whoever is in our team or in the jazz band, having open conversations, people who care, the right people on the team, could it be right people on the team,
Mm.
uh, to do exactly what you've just described, to discover the truth. And the truth, I think, is a journey. And you don't know what's true till you actually bloody implement it. It's
Mm.
like in my world, I'm in a really fortunate position very often when I'm doing company turnaround, because if I implement something, right, if I say what we're going to do is we're going to double our pricing, right? If I get that wrong, yeah, and sometimes I do, then I pick up that immediately and I have to correct it
Mm.
if I get it wrong. And so it comes so the truth and action, you only discover truth through action very often.
Mm.
Um, and so I think that's fantastic. That's what we need to create. And also humility as well. I think the other thing that and I challenge myself on this, and I think you've got a good mind, you've got a good, you take on board, let's say counter views, let's say, well, you receive them well. But I think, there's a sort of legend in their own lunchtime
Yeah.
post-COVID mentality where people have sort of believe in their own truths, and
Mm.
which is part of the reason why it's so important to have these sorts of challenging conversations.
It is. You just said something then that really jumped out at me because that's what I think. You said when you go into these companies, you want action.
Yeah,
And that's what I tell people now, especially when I'm talking about cowardice. It's about action.
yeah,
If you're waiting for the perfect scenario for you to
yes,
get involved and start fighting back, then you're going to be waiting forever because there is
yes,
no perfect time. We
no,
need action and we need action now. So
yeah,
start doing something now. It
yeah,
might tiny bits, tiny, there's 70 million people on this island, all do a tiny bit. That's a tsunami of
yeah,
action.
yes,
Um, and again, if you're waiting for other people, if you're waiting for the government to solve our problems, you'll be waiting a long time. And the best scenario example I can give on that is the grooming gangs. It's been
yeah,
going on 40 years.
no,
Hundreds of thousands of poor white girls have been gang raped,
yeah,
and we've still not stopped it, and we've still not held anyone accountable for it. So
yeah,
if you're waiting for the government to start solving our problems, think about the grooming gang scandal, because it'll only get solved because of all the people who have been protesting this for 20 years, who have managed to get it in, keep it in a public domain, who have now got it's gone international now, this scandal.
yeah,
And it's only them keeping it alive that have got us this far. And hopefully over the next 10 years, we'll get some politicians in jail for the cover-up over this.
yeah,
So stop waiting for someone else to solve the country's problems and your problems. Stop waiting for anything.
yeah,
Action and action today, and start small.
100%, yeah. Yeah, on that point, I mean, if you find people that are sort of waiting for the perfect scenario, if you listen to their dialogue, they'll always be blaming somebody else,
Hmm.
right? And blame is a sign of victimhood, and victimhood is a disaster.
Hmm.
I'll give you just around that what you just talked about. The reason why this is a danger, right? This is a psychological problem, uh, which is one of the things people need to become aware of if we want to fix this. Islam only became popular when they turned to violence via victimhood in the 800s, whatever that was.
Hmm.
Before then, they had no traction whatsoever. They were like a sort of bunch of hippie Christians of some variety, some sort of, and then they turned violent and claimed victimhood, and then they got traction. So this is the problem, right, Nick? If you're faced with a solution, right? If you're faced with a challenge, it's much easier to normalize it, and in that normalization, you screw yourself up, and then you've got various engaging, emotive, victim-centric dialogues, which unfortunately become very attractive, right?
Hmm.
Because they give you a purpose because you haven't got the balls to create your own bloody purpose, and so I think if people can do things which are they feel internally are the right things to do, as opposed to the bigger picture and ignore, put aside the threats, then I think what you're saying is right. But I think, I think we have got, I think there's a real, well, put it another way, I think we also need to think about people like Raja, that brilliant guy you've had
Hmm.
a lot of discussions with, who I think is a wonderful guy, great analysis, bright guy, real courage. He's got all the things we're talking about. We need to, rather than Raja saying that he'll never work in the police again. No, 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 no. Raja needs
Hmm.
to get into his head. he needs to head this up, right? And actually, on my list, we need to get people like him leading this stuff, Nick. Right? Actually, not in some sort of activist. I don't like Nick Tenconi talks about activism. I don't like the word activism. It's like someone sort of poking, just bloody poking you.
Mm.
A bit like your wind up, which is very 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 good. It's a reverse psychology of accusing people of being cowards. It's something you can do to wind people up, but it's sort of activism, Nick. We need people to actually have the get into their heads. They're going to lead this stuff. They're going to
Mm.
get. They're actually going to drive it. Nick's going to lead the
Mm.
solutions in the charity sector, because the charity sector is screwed up. You've got politicians who are actually gone from the corrupt political system into the heading up
Mm.
charities, which are advocating and fueling the protection of the illegal migrants, and spending massive amounts of money on these dreadful human rights lawyers who are some of
Yeah.
the most evil people I think I've ever come across.
Large parts of the charity sector are purely corrupt. I don't necessarily mean corrupt as in they're keeping all the money themselves. I'm talking about corrupt as in what they're doing and what you think they're doing, they're not doing. So the word charity now has been corrupted.
I know.
Many big charities need closing down. Oxfam, those were they were raping children in Haiti. Their staff
Oh,
using
man.
prostitutes in Africa and giving them
Yeah,
food
it's
for
unbelievable.
sex, and that's their
Mm,
staff.
mm.
The charity sector needs looking at completely. The amount of financial fraud as well in the
Yeah.
charity sector. It's not fit for purpose anymore now. But the general public hear the word charity and think of the old-fashioned meaning of charity and go, they must be great people doing great work, and they're not. Many of them now are political activists.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know, just to provoke this discussion a bit. I think the conclusion I'm sort of coming to, and I found this discussion really helpful, even though I'm a bit shot out. But um, the I think we need to get you and I need to get into and Ben Habib leading the GB
Mm,
pack, and Rupert Lowe heading up the whatever whoever these people are, right? Andrew Bridgen, rather than saying he'll never work in politics,
mm,
we need to get into our heads that we need to lead this, Nick, right? And we need to create, rather than us just being another bunch of activists, because you need a leader, right, who sets the example, because everybody follows the bloody leader, Nick,
mm.
right? So I mean, I'll give you another bit of um, pretty well proven psychology in an organization. Okay, if you've got a leader who is bent out, who's corrupt, 99, well, it's not, I think it's 75% of the people in any organization will just do what they say regardless, right?
Oh yeah, of course.
So there's a real responsibility, Nick, on you and I to raise our expectations to take these leadership positions, for you to sort
Mm,
out, because you've got the bloody balls and know-how,
mm,
and you can recognize this stuff, to sort out the charity sector, for example. I play a role in terms of the development of the skills to do this sort of
mm,
stuff, and heading up some of these teams and other stuff. You know, Rupert needs to get into his head that he's going to raise his bar. Ben, we've
mm,
got to bloody get that into our heads. With all of this, will never work in the charity, or I'll never do this, or because it's going to be the persecuted people, Nick, that have had a real kicking, right?
yeah.
And we will justify that kicking, that we are not now able to do those things moving forwards, Nick, which is what you've just described to me, my friend, with your psychology. And I
Let me
challenge
just
myself.
jump. Let me just jump in there. I think me and those other people you've mentioned, like Andrew Bridges, says he's not working politics again. Me saying I won't work in the charity sector again.
Yeah,
Isn't that we don't think that will never happen 100%? I think, well, let's what I think, instead of me putting words in Andrew Bridges' mouth.
yeah,
What I mean by that is, at this moment in time, there's no point me giving energy, time, and energy or time in me trying to work in the charity sector, because at this moment in time, that's closed off for me. Now I've got time and energy for fight, and you need to pick your battles. You need to pick
yeah,
battles you think you can win. So I'm picking battles. I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm trying to change things because I've made a decision, rightly or wrongly, that'll be more productive than me spending the next 5 years banging my head against doors trying to work in the charity sector and being rejected. If change comes, and I get into positions of leadership, I'm standing for elections every year or two. If we can change the current situation, the current environment, absolutely, doors then creak open a little bit, and then people like me, Andrew Bridge, and the people you've mentioned, then can get into those organisations to change them. But at this moment in time, they're closed shops.
Well, I can see a way forward to that, Nick.
No.
Okay, for what it's worth, I can see a way. Some of the things I'm working on in the background, I can see you being a name in the frame for that sort of stuff. It's certainly a monumental challenge. All I'd say is, and I'm challenging myself when I say this, we just need to become aware of our own psychology, right, which is preventing or limiting our aspirations. Because unless we change leadership, unless we change all the MPs in Parliament, who are, I mean, it's just, I looked at them, I just couldn't believe it this morning. I looked at Prime Minister's questions time today. I just, I mean, it's like Radio 4 on drugs. I can't listen to Radio 4 anymore.
Yeah.
It's just, and so the only answer to that, Nick, really, and the first thing in the company turnaround I do is I'll fire the MD, right? And I'll do that within 2 hours, right? If I need to. And the question I asked, I'll tell you the question I asked. I'll tell you what, this is relevant to what we're just talking about. I turned around a construction business, right, in Birmingham, which is really in desperate states. And this guy was appointed by the owner, went through the normal recruitment process, typical succession planning, which is a complete waste of time. But another conversation for another day. But and I asked him one question. I said, "Look, tell me about the challenges you faced, right, over the last 5 years since you were being managing director. What did you do about it?" And he told me what the challenges were. I said, "Well, what did you do about it?" "Nothing." I said, "You're fired. Now, go." Right. And the cost to the business, Nick, I took that cost on my own shoulders because obviously there's the cost in firing someone immediately, but the cost in having that person leading the business, Nick, just was not tenable. It would have, destroyed the entire. There's no cost you can put on that. I mean, it's relevant to what we're talking about, and so there was no chance of me fixing that business with someone that, over the last 5 years, has faced some relatively simple challenges and done nothing. So I think we need to just be aware of what's stopping us from doing things and keeping our aspirations really high, even though, the reality for us is still quite difficult. Let's face it.
It is, but you're right. We need to be aiming higher, and we need to be aspiring. I'm aspiring now to become an MP at the next general election,
Right.
And I'm spending all my time looking at that at the moment. I've got different things and irons in the fire at the moment. I'm not sure which direction I'm taking, but I'm definitely going to be standing at the next general election. I've got some other things that may be coming off this year, so it's about carrying on the fight and being flexible enough to change your plan when things around you change.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying. That's what I'm trying to do.
I think, well, Nick, on that note, you make a fantastic MP. I think that's a fantastic place to end this discussion. So God bless you, man. Let's make it happen. Let's also support each other making this happen as well, because it won't happen individually.
No, absolutely. And we need to be aware, like I said, with the grooming gangs, that if you're waiting for someone else to fix the problems, you're going to be waiting a long time. Only we can fix the problems, and we fix problems by joining up and supporting people like us with the same aims.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a good simple steer for people who, a lot of people wait for perfect scenario.
Yeah.
So it's a good steer for people to challenge their own thinking if they're thinking that, to check themselves. So brilliant, Nick. Great to see you, my friend. Take care. God bless
And you. Cheers.
Bye. Bye.